Welcome back everybody to another action-packed episode of Monte Poker. On today's vlogs, you're going to see us hit some big wins, take some big losses, and get stuck in some difficult situations. It's your boy Monte coming to you live from Santa Maria, California. As you may have guessed, this session is once again from Outlaws. They have a wonderful 1-3 match to stack for all the newer viewers with juicy action. This session is all over the place, but we end up getting crushed by the end of the night. But as I've always said, we're super transparent here. We're not only going to post the wins, we got to post the losses too. Regardless of the outcome, the session was absolutely crazy. We definitely won some big hands, so let's jump into it. We looked down at ace jack offsuit in the cutoff, and I raised to $22 pre-flop. We end up getting a couple of callers here, so we're off multi-way to this board with 46 in the middle. The board runs out 4, 3, 5 with 2 clubs. We only have ace high right now, but if we hit a 2, we can make a straight, or if we get running clubs, we can make a flush. When our opponent bets $20, I decide to get sticky here and put in the call. $86 in the middle going to this turn, which is the 7 of clubs. Our opponent decides to check now, which gives us an opportunity. We can hit one more club for a flush or potentially steal this pot now. I decided to bet $30, which in hindsight is a little too small if I was trying to steal it. Our opponent puts the call in, so there's 136 going to this river, which comes a king of diamonds. So still ace high, our opponent checks it to us, so now we can either just give up and check back, or we can try to steal it. I decide to rip it. I can't win at showdown. Our opponent very quickly puts in the call. I tell him he's good, and he has 6-9 of hearts for a straight. Yeah, there was a very low chance with our chip stack that we were going to be able to get him off of that hand. Even if we made the flush, he probably just would have paid us off with how short stacked we were. Rather unfortunate way to start off the session, but luckily this next hand is a little bit better. We are in the small blind, and there is a $7 straddle on the button. Under the gun decides to put in a raise to $16 here. The action gets down to the middle position player, who also calls. I take a quick peek at my cards, and we look down at pocket tens. We're absolutely going to see a flop with this hand, but the question is, do we want to call or raise? If a couple of players limp in, I think I'm going to lean towards a raise. With a pair as strong as this, we don't want to let too many people see a flop, because if any Broadway cards hit the board, then we're going to have a very hard time continuing. As I'm thinking it over, I noticed another player in middle position grabbing some chips. He throws them in the middle, and then the action is back over to the button. Now this player is a very capable player. We just had a very small raise pre-flop and a ton of limpers. If the button likes his hand here, we're definitely going to see a squeeze incoming, and a squeeze we do see. The price to see the flop is now 100, and we absolutely cannot fold here. Now let me prefix this. I would normally not call $100 pre-flop with pocket tens, because most of the time at a 1-3 game you're going to be shown a bigger pair. If you're lucky, you'll get a flip with ace king, but because of the particular player and the fact that there was a button straddle, this just seems like a light squeeze in my opinion. He could have a monster, and if he does, then all the money is going to get in the middle, as long as no face cards hit this board. After thinking it over for a bit, the original raiser does elect to throw away his hand. The player in middle position ends up calling the 100. MP1 decides to fold, and we're going to go 3 ways to this board. 375 in the middle, and we get a wonderful flop, 4 deuce 4. Just what the doctor ordered. We're just going to jam here. There's no rhyme or reason to trying to slow play this and potentially risk checking this board through. The instant all in also looks a bit suspicious. If we had any sort of hand that contained 2 clubs in it, like jack 10 of clubs, queen jack, king queen, king jack, or even ace king of clubs, we would do something similar. So if our opponent on the button has any sort of pocket pair, there's a chance he might call. If he has even just ace high, he might call as well. The middle position player ended up folding during our giant dissertation, and the action is now back on the button, who's really mulling this decision over. He does not seem to like the spot that he's currently in. He goes into the tank for, I kid you not, well over 4 minutes before eventually making the following decision. Wow, it sounds like the button may have actually had a pretty big decision to make. Either way, the pot is being scooped in our direction. Let me know what you guys think he had in the comment section below. About 30 minutes go by before we look down at ace king offsuit. We are currently on the big blind, and there was a $15 raise by the under the gun player. Two players behind her in the middle ended up putting in a call, so we're gonna go ahead and put in a raise because we don't want to see this flop multi-way. I raised to $75, hoping to take down the dead money in the middle without having to get to showdown, but if we do get a call, I am totally fine with that as well. So one of the players at the other end of the table does decide to put in the call for 75. The third player gets out of the way, so we're going to go heads up out of position. Regardless of what this board runs out, we're going to have to bet it with a high frequency with the hand that we have trying to represent an overpair, but fortunately for us, the board does run out king high. As I mentioned, we're going to fire at a high frequency on any board texture with our bluffs, so when we actually hit, we also need to continue here. I decide to bet about 100. It's a little over a half pot size bet. Fortunately, our opponent does fold. Margot to my left mentions that she folded pocket nines. I show her the ace king and told her it would have gotten real ugly. Fortunately, we raised enough to get her out of the hand. Otherwise, we would have lost a massive pot to her. Speaking of losing massive pots, we look down at ace jack offsuit, one of my favorite punting hands. We always seem to lose the maximum with this particular hand. I don't know why. Maybe I'm a donkey. Maybe it's bad luck. Who knows? Anyhow, we look at down at ace jack in late position. I end up raising to 30 and we end up getting one customer, $62 in the middle, and we go off to this board that comes 9, 10, 5 with two spades. We are holding the ace of spades, so we could potentially backdoor into a straight or a flush. The action checks over to me. I didn't realize that the action checked over to me, so I asked the dealer what's going on. He tells me that the other person already checked. So I start grabbing chips for a raise, and my opponent beats me into the pot. He just goes ahead and matches our stack size here. So now there is 120 in the middle. Him beating me into the pot was a bit scary, so I'm definitely going to slow down on this turn when it comes a 9 of diamonds and changes absolutely nothing on this board. I'm putting our opponent on some sort of made hand like pocket 7, pocket 8s, maybe ace 10 or something of that nature. Then the jack of clubs hits the river. I honestly would have preferred to hit my ace over the jack because an open-ended straight draw did get there, 7, 8, but the spades did miss. So I'm going to go for some value here since I did put our opponent on a pair, either the 10s or some sort of pocket pair. There isn't a snap call, so that's good news. It also doesn't look like our opponent is Hollywooding before putting in a raise. I think he is sincerely just debating whether or not we hit this jack. Bit of a tough spot for him. I'm not sure what I would do in his shoes, but he does ultimately end up making the correct choice and folding his hand. We end up scooping another small pot. I'm sure you guys didn't click on this video to see small pots, so let's ramp it up with this next hand. We look down at the best hand ever created, pocket aces, from the best position on the poker table, the button. So there was a $3 limp around the table. The cutoff raised to $20. We're going to put in a 3-bet here. We want it to be big enough for the limpers not to call, but small enough that the player behind us puts in the call. I decided to make it $60 here. It's 3 times his original opening size. There's a small chance that he folds if he doesn't have a good enough hand, but we want to get action, and action we do get. He puts in the call. We're heads up to this board, 130 in the middle, and the board comes out 6-3 deuce with 2 diamonds. Our opponent checks, and we're going to go for a c-bet here. I would do this with all of our strong non-paired hands, so of course we have to do it when we are holding the best pair in the game. I continue for $75, and our opponent puts in the call very quickly. We now have a good sized pot to play for. The 6 of clubs comes on the turn. Our opponent checks again, and now we have a decision to make. What do we think our opponent has, and how much of a bet sizing will he call? He could have ace king and think we're just full of it and might have called our flop bet just to see what we do on the turn. He also could be on a draw if he has something like ace king or ace queen of diamonds, or he could have a pocket pair that is well above this board but doesn't necessarily want to lead into the pre-flop aggressor that raised him. That being said, I think ace king is going to run away after a turn bet regardless of the sizing, so I'm going to go ahead and target any hands that are drawing to the diamonds and big pocket pairs. So that's exactly what we do here. I continue for $225. This is not a good price for our opponent to chase the flush. If he is on the flush draw, he's getting about 3-1 on his money, but he only has 15% equity to see the final card here. If he is holding a pocket pair that's around 9s, 10s, or jacks though, it's going to be pretty hard for him to fold in this situation. The problem is that he only has about 350 to 400 behind, so if he does end up calling here, he's not going to have enough to get away from it on the river regardless of what card comes out. So he's pretty much pot committing himself at this point. Very tough spot for our opponent to be in. Do not envy him at the moment. And then he makes the following decision. As you can clearly see, I am not thrilled at the current situation. The reason I am not thrilled is because our opponent is jamming, but he only has about 120 to 160 more than what I already have out there. So I'm never folding in this situation. So if our opponent knows that, this doesn't look like a jam to try to get us off the hand. It looks like a jam for value. So if he flopped a set here and boated up on the turn, it is what it is. I'm just gonna have to give him the extra 150 bucks and cry about it later.
I have to call.
Over 1,000 in the middle, and the 10 of spades hits the board.
Nice, man. I thought you were going.
I'm honestly surprised our aces were good there after we got shoved on the turn for that amount, but luckily I guess we've been playing like a donkey this session and bluffing too much, so we had a terrible table image, but luckily it got us paid in this hand. Always happy to scoop $1,000 pot in the right direction. Next hand of interest brings us a PLO Bomb Pot. We look down at ace 10, 9, queen with 2 spades and then a club and a queen. Board comes out 8, 7, ace, rainbow. For those of you that are Hold'em players, you probably think I have a straight right now, but unfortunately I do not. When you play PLO, you have to use 2 cards from your hand and 3 on the board. So right now I technically just have a bunch of different ways of making a straight. I can hit a 5, an 8, a 9, a 10, or a jack to make my straight. And the board does not have a flush draw on it, so it's very likely that my straight will be good if it hits. So when the opponent bets $30 in early position, I decide to put in a call here. It's a $90 cap game, so worst case scenario, we lose another 60 bucks chasing our straight, but that's not the case. We immediately drill the 10 on the turn, so now we have a straight here, but there's an available club draw. Our opponent caps it at $65 on the turn and shows his hand early. He shows us top set, so he has 3 aces here, but he also has the flush draw. Luckily for me, he's holding 3 clubs. There's 2 on the board and 1 in my hand, so that's less clubs that are potentially going to hit. So we only have to avoid an ace or a 6 on this river, and it's a 6. Yikes. We had him in pretty rough shape. We were totally good to win this bomb pot, but he boated up on the river, so now we got to pay my man off. Nice hand, Ronnie. Keep my chips warm because we're definitely coming for him later. 15 minutes go by and we look down at king 10 offsuit under the gun +1. There was a $6 straddle and I decided to just limp in here. Not looking to raise with this hand. Definitely didn't want to fold it either. I normally like to raise before going into a pot so you don't have to play things multi-way, but you know, we were trying to preserve some chips. We were donking off at the beginning of the session, so I'm okay just saying a cheap flop and seeing what happens. $36 in the middle, and the board comes out king high. We hit top pair, and we have a decent kicker. When an opponent bets $15, I decide to stick around and put in a call here. Against a tighter opponent, I'd probably just fold in this spot because we're most likely going to be out kicked, but the player in the big blind is a very aggressive player and has a wide range, so he could easily be doing this with a jack. The small blind ends up folding, so it's just going to be 2 of us going to this turn here. So the dealer throws out an additional 6 on the turn. I don't think it really changes much on this board. Once every blue moon, our opponent is going to have a 6 here, but typically he's going to have a jack or a diamond draw, potentially a king, but you know, if he has a king, he has a king, so be it. So when I bet $26 on this turn, our opponent grabs some chips, lines them up, and decides to put in a very small raise here. He min clicks us. He called our 26 and added 26 on top. That's a bit concerning to me, not because it's a large amount, but more because this is an action player that likes to play really big pots. So when he min clicks for this amount, it just looks extremely strong to me. Either way, I can't really fold just yet, so I'm going to put in the call and see what he does on the river. 140 in the middle and the 4 of hearts peels off. I am watching my opponent like a hawk and he puts in a check. This situation is really weird, so I just flip over my cards.
You got kings and 6s with a jack here. Whoa.
Something smelled a little fishy.
Oh gosh.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we ran into quads, but lost the minimum. All right, that was a small pot, so time to up the stakes just a little bit. We looked down at 7-8 of spades in the cutoff. The action limped over to us, so we're gonna put in a small raise and take the pre-flop aggression. I opened to $17. A couple players fold. We get a call from the small blind, one of the middle position players, and then the player in the hijack. So we go off to this flop 4 ways. $51 in the middle, and the board runs out 3-9 jack with 2 hearts. We have a backdoor flush draw and a gut shot straight draw. When the action checks over to us, we're gonna put in a bet here for $20 and try to take this pot down. We could have a hand like ace jack or ace king of hearts. We get 1 caller, but the other 2 players do decide to get out of the way, trying to make some of that money that we lost in the quads earlier tonight. So we go off to this turn heads up, and the turn card is the 3 of diamonds. Don't expect this to change anything that we're playing for all too much, so I do decide to continue here for a bet sizing of around $60. It's about 2/3 of what was in the pot. Our opponent is thinking it over for a little bit here. I catch him glancing over at us, trying to get some sort of read. This pot isn't too out of control, so I'm not quite sure why he's thinking about this too much, especially on this board texture. Now I'm starting to wonder what our opponent might have. The most obvious thing is some sort of flush draw, but I don't think he'd be tanking this long for a $60 bet into 151. After all the theatrics and looking down at his hand a couple times, our opponent does eventually put in the call, so we're gonna go off to this river with 211 in the middle, and the 9 of spades peels off. Our opponent checks it to us a 3rd time, and at this point we have 8 high. We have absolutely no showdown value, so the only way that we are going to win this hand is by betting it. So I do decide to bet $125. It's a bit on the smaller side, but if our opponent was on some sort of misdraw and just has ace high, I expect him to fold for this amount. And if he has a hand that is crushing us, he's definitely going to raise. I put him on a boat potentially on the turn, but now that another 9 hit the river, it's any 9 or 3 would obviously have a boat in this situation. I put him on potentially pocket 9s on the turn, but now that another 9 has hit the river, it's unlikely that he has quads again. So maybe he had pocket jacks. So our opponent does announce raise and puts the 125 in, but hasn't announced how much more he's going to raise. Unfortunately, regardless of the amount, even be it $5, I don't think we can call because we just have a high. And our opponent announces 350 more on top of the 150. Absolutely massive bet. We're not going to call here. We just have ace high. I'm just posturing for a little bit so it doesn't look like we were just bluffing our pants off, but eventually we do return our cards to the dealer. The next hand of interest brings us to a $6 button straddle by yours truly. After everybody limps, I look down at my hand and we pick up Jack 8 of clubs. Since nobody raised pre-flop, I don't expect a lot of people to have a very good hand that can call a big bet. So I decided to make it $30. Probably should have gone a little bit bigger, like 40 or 45 if I wanted to get this squeeze through. Fortunately, only 1 player called. Unfortunately, that player is my girlfriend. $84 in the middle, and the board comes out 8-8-9 with 2 hearts. Absolutely smashed it. I don't expect either of us to ever be holding an 8 in this spot unless it's ace 8 suited. I put in a bet of $15 and Margot calls the $15. I expect her to float with all her overs for a $15 bet on the flop. So now we're gonna size up and try to punish for her calling the flop bet. I line up $60 here, throw that into the middle. I don't expect Margot to call here unless she has the flush draw or potentially hit that 9 with a hand like maybe 9-10 suited. She calls 1 more street and we're off to this river with 244 in the middle. She checks a 3rd time, and now we have a decision once again. If she had a heart draw, there's no way she's going to call any bet sizing on the river, so we want to target either a pair of 9s or potentially a pair of kings. It's very possible that she had a heart draw with a king jack of hearts or king queen of hearts that now rivered top pair. So I don't want to go too big here, but I do want to get some value out of those hands. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you heard that correctly. I am going for value against my girlfriend. We are poker players first and a couple second. If she gets felted, is her rebuy money coming out of our pocket? Maybe. Is that relevant? Absolutely not. Right now, she's the villain in our story and we are going to milk her for everything that she has. I decide to bet 100, and that's when tragedy strikes.
Dude. I have to call. I have a
Brother, what's that? What's that, brother?
Oh my god, how does she show up with 8-9 suited there? That sucks. Then she just absolutely crushes my soul by flopping a house when I flop trips. Man, that one hurt. Well, nice hand, Margot. Way to go, girl. You have definitely started to open up your range, as you should when you have stacked depth. Sucks that it was against me. In this next hand, we look down at Jack 10 of hearts under the gun. I decide to raise to $15. There hasn't been too much action at the table, and people have been folding to $10 to $12 pre-flop bets, so I was trying to get a couple people involved here and build a pot. Action folds over to the cutoff, who ends up raising us to $30. Nothing more than a min click. Definitely not folding for $15 more in this spot, so when the action folds over to us, I do put in the call. So we go heads up to this flop here, which comes out queen, king, queen, rainbow. No flush draw for us, but we do have an open ender. I do expect our opponent's range to include a lot of ace king and ace queen when she raises us pre. She ends up checking the flop, which I find interesting. Now I'm thinking she may have had a pair like pocket tens or pocket jacks, so I decide to fire out here for $50. Our opponent grabs a bigger stack of chips and instantly raises us to 100. I don't think she'd be doing this with the king, so I'm putting her on ace queen in this spot. I end up making the call, and then we absolutely drill the perfect river card, the ace of diamonds. But then I realized that I put my opponent on ace queen, so she easily could have boated up here. I do decide to check. She jams, but it's not that much money, so we have to call here. And she shows us pocket kings. That just goes to show you that you shouldn't be chasing any sort of flush or straight draws on paired boards, especially when the flop is nothing but face cards versus a tighter, shorter stacked opponent. Absolutely owned ourselves on this one. Luckily, we know the villain of this story. It is our friend Jenna, and I am happy that she made the vlog. Nice hand, Jenna. The rest of the night is pretty uneventful. I should have probably left a lot sooner because our chip stack was slowly dwindling, but we ended up staying until 5 or 6 in the morning after this session. Absolutely brutal. We sat down and were bluffing our butts off at the start of the session, and then we got kind of tilted that we had lost so much money. Made a good amount of it back, but we were still stuck $100 or $200, at which point I probably should have gotten up and left, but I decided to push it and try to get above even, and then the chip stack started dwindling in the wrong direction. Got really tilted at some of the bad plays that we made, and overall we just ended up going home in a bad state with zero money. We didn't lose our entire bankroll, but we just didn't cash out anything, and I gave up after 5 a.m. I was mostly upset with myself. This was one of those sessions where I didn't feel like I was playing my best and I was making a lot of mistakes, and once we had gotten some of our losses back and we're close to even, it was probably time to just get up and go and call it a day. Unfortunately, that isn't what we did. We stayed an additional 7 or 8 hours after that. I often tell you guys, you know, what I'm trying to do and what I want to do, and the things I'm basically trying to tell myself to be an overall positive poker player, to always be coming in and playing my best. If you just run into coolers, that's one thing, but if you're playing bad and you know it, there's no reason to force yourself to stay longer. The poker table is always going to be there. That's something I try to remind myself of on a regular basis. If I'm not having a good day, if I'm running super bad, or if I'm just tilted, I can always get up and come back on a different day. There's no reason to have to force it. Anyhow, closing out the vlog with this last hand here, it's a PLO Bomb Pot. I flopped trips and had the flush draw, queen high flush draw on top of it. A couple people threw in $10. I decided to just cap it, get it over with. Let's play for all of it. Why not? We have trips and the second nut flush draw. Yes, the board is paired, but you know, we could hit a deuce, a 4, or a queen to potentially hit a full house as long as our opponent did not flop one. 4 of diamonds on the turn, jack of diamonds on the river. We have a boat, and it looks like it is good. All right, ladies and gents, it's time for the bankroll update. All right, so this session is from May 11th. Bought in for $11.50 and cashed out 0. So down $1,100. Sucks to suck. But you know what's absolutely insane? I was so tilted from how bad we played in this session. I went home, got home at like 5, 6 in the morning, took a shower, went to bed, woke up at like 10:30 maybe. Drove straight to the Shoe Mash because Closer Casino is closed on Sundays, and Outlaws has PLO for a while, so they don't have normal hold'em. Ran over to Shoe Mash. So we're looking at 512 now. We bought in for $420 and cashed out $1,000. Oh, cashed out 1440, not 1000, 1440. So $1,020 in profit. So the night before was only $100 loss, which then brings our total to $9,889 in profit, which is absolutely savage. I can't believe I slept that little, went and actually played well. Anyhow, that's the end of it for this one. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. I really appreciate all your love and support. Take care.